Our digital investigative reporter Jordan Fisher was in the courtroom today as the justices handed down these decisions. And Jordan, so let's start with the birthright case that we were just talking about.
Yeah, so the court's decision today, we know it almost had nothing to do with the premise of this case, right? Which is about who gets granted citizenship.
Right, that's true. How is this going to play out, right? That's the big question, because what you had now, and for 60 years really, is lower court judges who believed that the federal government was instituting an unconstitutional policy would say you can't do that against the people who sued, and you can't sue that anywhere because that's how the federal government works. When you invoke an executive power, you're invoking it on all of us. Now it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and so, you know, if, for example, the president signs an order tomorrow that says people with brunette hair can't vote, that affects me and I can sue, and the judge might say, well, that's unconstitutional, but Leslie, you'd have to sue as well. Or we would have to do what the plaintiffs in the Maryland case have done, which is this group of expectant mothers, and file what's called a class action lawsuit. But the bar to that is much higher, it's a much more rigorous standard, and it takes much longer to get relief.
Could be very expensive, too, to pursue that as well. So let's talk about the case that impacts Montgomery County and the court's ideological differences. You could see that again in that 6-3 result there, conservatives siding with these Montgomery County parents. I'm curious, I mean, was this a surprise at all, or did we anticipate this happening?
Right, well, I think in oral arguments earlier this year, the conservative majority really telegraphed they were going this way. But if you look at the Roberts Court generally, which has been, over the last 20 years, they have repeatedly sided with plaintiffs who come raising religious objections, concerns. In fact, there was an analysis a few years ago that said that more than 80% of the time they've sided with those litigants. You looked at their Masterpiece Cake Shop decision from 7 years ago about a baker who wanted to object to making a wedding cake for a gay couple. A few years ago, they sided with a postal worker who had religious objections to working on Sundays. So really par for the course for this court, and not particularly surprising.
Yeah, so we know the decision was 6-3 with all the court's liberals dissenting here. So what was their chief concern?
Yeah, they really raised two concerns. One is that this sort of shortcuts the democratic process. They said if parents object to school board curriculum or curriculum imposed by the school board, they can vote the board out. And Justice Sotomayor noted that, in fact, parents had voted several members of the Montgomery County School Board out amid this controversy. But their bigger concern was that this will create a slippery slope. What if there are, and there have been, as Justice Sotomayor noted, objections on religious grounds to the teaching of evolution, or the teaching of yoga in a gym class, or the teaching of other religions in a social studies class. Must schools accommodate that? Must teachers work around that? And if not, is it a constitutional violation that's going to go back to the Supreme Court? Justice Sotomayor said this could throw schools across the country into chaos as they try to work around this order.
Right. Talk about the democratic process. We saw this play out in Loudoun County. They didn't agree with what was being taught, how it was being taught, and they got those board members out of there.
And this whole, end of the school year, schools and parents and administrators and teachers are going to have to rethink all of this in the wake of these Supreme Court decisions.
That's right.
All right, Jordan, thank you. And of course, it may take some time to see the full impact of these rulings.
Yeah, so count on us to stay on top of the changes in our community as a result of these Supreme Court decisions, of course. And we're going to share those updates right here on air, online, and streaming on WUSA 9+.
All right, Jordan, thank you again for that great reporting.